Hello and welcome back, billionairettes, to another Read With Me session on Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. We are currently about to dive into chapter 3 of this book, which is called Understanding and Combating Shame. In the last chapter, we spoke about the myths of vulnerability. So go check it out if you don't remember them or you miss them. They're in the playlist in YouTube. Go check them out. I don't want to waste any more time. Let's dive right into it. I'm so happy and grateful that you are here investing your time, 30 minutes of your day to your personal development, your personal growth, and we get to spend it together. So let's dive right into it. Chapter 3, Understanding and Combating Shame, aka Gremlin Ninja Warrior Training. Shame derives its power from being unspeakable. That's why it loves perfectionists. It's so easy to keep us quiet. If we cultivate enough awareness about shame to name it and to speak to it, we basically cut it off at the knees. Shame hates having words wrapped around it. If we speak shame, it begins to wither. Just the way exposure to light was deadly for the gremlins. Language and story bring light to shame and destroy it. Vulnerability and shame in one book? Are you trying to kill us? Or defense against the dark arts. Last year, after I had finished a talk on the wholehearted families, a man approached me on the stage. He stuck out his hand and said, "I just want to say thank you." I shook his hand and offered a kind smile as he looked down at the floor. I could tell that he was fighting back tears. He took a deep breath and said, "I have to tell you that I really don't want to come tonight. I tried to get out of it, but my wife made me." I chuckled. Yeah, I get that a lot. I couldn't understand why she was so excited. I told her that I couldn't think of a worse way to spend a Thursday night than listening to a shame researcher. She said that it was really important to her and I had to stop complaining, otherwise I'd ruin it for her. He paused for a few seconds and then surprised me by asking, "Are you a Harry Potter fan?" I stalled for a second while I tried to connect everything he was saying. When I finally gave up, I answered his question. Yes, I am a huge fan. I read all of the books several times and I've watched and rewatched the movies. I'm hardcore. Why? He looked a little embarrassed before he explained, "Well, I didn't know anything about you, and as my dread built up about coming tonight, I kept picturing you as Snap. I thought you'd be scary. I thought you'd be wearing all black and that you talk slowly in a deep, haunting voice like the world was ending." I laughed so hard that I almost spit out the water I was drinking. I love Snap. I'm not sure that I want to look like him, but he's my favorite character. I immediately glanced around my purse, which was still tucked under the bottom of the podium. In it, my keys were and are attached to my beloved Lego Snap keychain. We shared a laugh about his Snap projection. Then things got more serious. What you said really made sense to me, especially the part about us being so afraid of the dark stuff. What's the quote you shared with the picture of the twinkle lights? Quote, "Oh, the twinkle light quote? It's one of my favorites. Only when we're brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light." He nodded. Yes, that one. I'm sure that's why I didn't want to come. It's crazy how much energy we spend trying to avoid these hard topics when they're really the only ones that can set us free. I was shamed a lot growing up, and I don't want to do that to my 3 kids. I want them to know they're enough. I don't want them to be afraid to talk about the hard shit with us. I want them to be shame resilient. At this point, we are both teary-eyed. I reached up and did that awkward, "Are you a hugger?" gesture. Then I gave him a big old hug. After we let go of our "this stuff is hard, but we can do it" embrace. He looked at me and said, "I'm pretty bad at vulnerability, but I'm really good at shame. Is getting past shame necessary for getting to vulnerability?" Yes, shame resilience is key to embracing our vulnerability. We can't let ourselves be seen if we're terrified by what people might think. Often, not being good at vulnerability means that we're damn good at shame. As I stumbled for better language to explain how shame stops us from being vulnerable and connected, I remembered my very favorite exchange from Harry Potter. Do you remember when Harry was worried that he might be bad because he was angry all of the time and had dark feelings? He enthusiastically answered, "Yes, of course." The conversation was Sirius Black. That's the moral of the entire story. Exactly. Sirius told Harry to listen to him very carefully. Then he said, "You're not a bad person. You're a very good person who bad things have happened to. Besides, the world isn't split into good people and Death Eaters. We've all got both light and dark inside us. What matters is the part we choose to act on. That too, we really are." "I get it," he sighed. "We all have shame. We all have good and bad, dark and light inside of us. But if we don't come to terms with our shame, our struggles, we start believing that there's something wrong with us, that we're bad, flawed, not good enough, and even worse, we start acting on those beliefs. If we want to be fully engaged, to be connected, we have to be vulnerable. In order to be vulnerable, we need to develop resilience to shame." At this point, his wife was waiting by the stage stairs. He thanked me, gave me another quick hug, and walked away. Just as he reached the bottom of the stairs, he turned back and said, "You may not be Snap, but you're a damn good defense against the dark arts teacher." It was a conversation in a moment that I'll never forget. On the way home that night, I thought about a line from one of the books where Harry Potter was detailing the fate of several unsuccessful defense against a dark arts teacher. One sacked, one dead, one lost his memory, and one was locked in a trunk for 9 months. I remember thinking, sounds about right. I won't go on with the Harry Potter metaphor because I'm sure there's one or two of you out there who haven't had the chance to read the books or see the films, but I have to say that J.K. Rowling's incredible imagination has made teaching shame a lot easier and way more fun. The allegorical power of Harry Potter lends itself to talking about everything from the struggle between light and dark to the hero's journey and why vulnerability and love are the truest marks of courage. Having spent so long trying to describe and define unnamed emotions and experiences, I find that Harry Potter has given me a treasure trove of characters, monsters, and images to use in my teaching. For that, I'll be forever grateful. I didn't set out to become a wild-eyed shame evangelist or a defense against the dark arts teacher, but after spending the past decade studying the corrosive effect that shame has on how we live, love, parent, work, and lead, I found myself practically screaming from the top of my lungs. Yes, shame is tough to talk about, but the conversation isn't nearly as dangerous as what we're creating with our silence. We all experience shame. We're all afraid to talk about it, and the less we talk about it, the more we have it. We have to be vulnerable if we have want more courage, if we want to dare greatly. But as I told my Harry Potter friend, how can we let ourselves be seen if shame has us terrified of what people might think? Let me give you an example. You've designed a product or written an article or created a piece of art that you want to share with a group of friends. Sharing something that you've created is a vulnerable but essential part of engaged and wholehearted living. It's the epitome of daring greatly. But because of how you were raised or how you approach the world, you've knowingly or unknowingly attached your self-worth to how your product or art is received. In simple terms, if they love it, you're worthy. If they don't, you're worthless. One of the two things happens at this point in the process. One, once you realize that your self-worth is hitched to what you produced or created, it's unlikely that you'll share it. Or if you do, you'll strip away a layer or two of the juiciest creativity and innovation to make the revealing less risky. There's too much on the line to just put your wildest creations out there. Number two, if you do share it in the most creative form and the reception doesn't meet your expectation, you're crushed. Your offering is no good and you're no good. The chances of soliciting feedback, re-engaging, and going back to the drawing board are slim. You shut down. Shame tells you that you shouldn't have even tried. Shame tells you that you're not good enough and you should have known better. If you're wondering what happens if you attach your self-worth to your art or your products and people love it, let me answer that from personal and professional experience. You're in even deeper trouble. Everything shame needs to hijack and control your life is in place. You've handed over your self-worth to what people think. It's panned out of a couple times, but now it feels a lot like Hotel California. You can check in, but you can never leave. You're officially a prisoner of pleasing, performing, and perfecting. With an awareness of shame and strong shame resilience skills, the scenario is completely different. You still want folks to like, respect, and even admire what you've created, but your self-worth is not on the table. You know that you are far more than a painting, an innovative idea, an effective pitch, a good sermon, or a high Amazon.com ranking. Yes, it will be disappointing and difficult if your friends or colleagues don't share your enthusiasm or if things don't go well, but this effort is about what you do, not who you are. Regardless of the outcome, you've already dared greatly, and that's totally aligned with your values, with who you want to be. When our self-worth isn't on the line, we are far more willing to be courageous and risk sharing our raw talents and gifts. From my research with families, schools, and organizations, it's clear that shame-resilient cultures nurture folks who are much more open to soliciting, accepting, and incorporating feedback. These cultures also nurtured engaged, tenacious people who expect to have to try and try again to get it right. People who are much more willing to get innovative and creative in their efforts. A sense of worthiness inspires us to be vulnerable, share openly, and preserve. Shame keeps us small, resentful, and afraid. In shame-prone cultures where parents, leaders, and administrators consciously or unconsciously encourage people to connect their self-worth to what they produce, I see disengagement, blame, gossip, stagnation, favoritism, and a total dearth of creativity and innovation. Peter is an author, speaker, and CEO of Change Labs, a global consultancy building and delivering large-scale behavioral change projects from clients such as Apple and IBM. Pete and I had the chance to work together last summer, and I think his perspective on shame is spot on. Pete says, the secret killer of innovation is shame. You can't measure it, but it is there. Every time someone holds back on a new idea, fails to give their manager much needed feedback, and is afraid to speak up in front of a client, you can be sure shame played a part. That deep fear we all have of being wrong, of being belittled, and of feeling less than is what stops us taking the very risk to move our companies forward. If you want a culture of creativity and innovation where sensible risks are embraced on both a market and individual level, start by developing the ability of managers to cultivate an openness to vulnerability in their teams. And this paradoxically perhaps requires first that they are vulnerable themselves. This notion that the leader needs to be in charge and to know all the answers is both dated and destructive. Its impact on others is the sense that they know less and that they are less than. A recipe for risk aversion, if ever I have heard it. Shame becomes fear. Fear leads to risk aversion. Risk aversion kills innovation. The bottom line is that daring greatly requires worthiness. Shame sends the gremlins to fill our heads with completely different messages of dare not, you're not good enough, don't you dare get too big for your britches. The term gremlin, as we are most familiar with it, comes from Steven Spielberg, 1984, horror comedian Gremlins. Gremlins are those evil little green tricksters who wreak havoc everywhere they go. They're manipulated monsters that derive pleasure from destruction. In many circles, including my own, the word gremlin has become synonymous with shame tape. For example, I was recently struggling to finish an article. I called a good friend to tell her about my writer's block, and she immediately responded by asking, "What are the gremlins saying?" This is a very effective way of asking about the shame tapes, the messages of self-doubt, self-criticism that we carry around in our heads. My answer was, there are a few of them. One saying that my writing sucks and that no one cares about these topics. Another one's telling me that I'm going to get criticized and I'll deserve it. And the big one keeps saying, real writers don't struggle like this. Real writers don't dangle their modifiers. Understanding our shame tapes or gremlins is critical to overcoming shame because we can't always point to a certain moment or a specific put down at the hands of another person. Sometimes shame is a result of us playing the old recordings that were programmed when we were children or simply absorbed from the culture. My good friend and colleague Robert Hilliker says, shame started as a two-person experience, but as I got older, I learned how to do shame all by myself. Sometimes when we dare to walk into the arena, the greatest critic we face is ourselves. Shame derives its power from being unspeakable. That's why it loves perfectionists. It's so easy to keep us quiet. If we cultivate enough awareness about shame to name it and speak to it, we basically cut it off at the knees. Shame hates having words wrapped around it. If we speak shame, it begins to wither, just the way exposure to light was deadly for the gremlins. Language and story bring light to shame and destroy it. Just like Roosevelt advised, when we dare greatly, we will err and we will come up short again and again. There will be failures and mistakes and criticism. If we want to be able to move through the difficult disappointments, the hurt feelings, and the heartbreaks that are inevitable in a fully lived life, we can't equate defeat with being unworthy of love, belonging, and joy. If we do, we'll never show up and try again. Shame hangs out in the parking lot of the arena, waiting for us to come out defeated and determined to never take risk. It laughs and says, I told you this was a mistake. I knew you weren't blank enough. Shame resilience is the ability to say, this hurts. This is disappointing, maybe even devastating, but success and recognition and approval are not the values that drive me. My value is courage, and I was just courageous. You can move on, shame. So I'm not trying to kill you. I'm just saying we can't embrace vulnerability if shame is suffocating our sense of worthiness and connection. Sorry. Strap yourself in and let's get our heads and hearts around this experience called shame so we can get about the business of truly living. What is shame and why is it so hard to talk about? If you're pretty sure that shame doesn't apply to you, keep reading. I'll clear that up in the next couple of pages. I start every talk, article, and chapter on shame with the shame 1, 2s, and 3s for the first 3 things that you need to know about shame, so you'll keep listening. Number 1, we all have it. Shame is universal and one of the most primitive human emotions that we experience. The only people who don't experience shame lack the capacity for empathy and human connection. Here's your choice. Fess up to experiencing shame or admit that you're a sociopath. Quick note, this is the only time that shame seems like a good option. Number 2, we're all afraid to talk about shame. Number 3, the less we talk about shame, the more control it has over our lives. There are a couple of very helpful ways to think about shame. First, shame is the fear of disconnection. We are psychologically, emotionally, and cognitively and spiritually hardwired for connection, love, and belonging. Connection along with love and belonging is why we are here, and it is what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. Shame is the fear of disconnection. It's the fear that something we've done or failed to do, an ideal that we've not lived up to, or a goal that we've not accomplished makes us unworthy of connection. I'm not worthy or good enough for love, belonging, or connection. I'm unlovable. I don't belong. Here's the definition of shame that emerged from my research. Shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. People often want to believe that shame is reserved for people who have survived an unspeakable trauma, but this is not true. Shame is something we all experience, and while it feels as if shame hides in our darkest corners, it actually tends to lurk in all of the familiar places. 12 shame categories have emerged from my research, and I'll list them below. Appearance and body image, money and work, motherhood, fatherhood, family, parenting, mental and physical health, addiction, sex, aging, religion, surviving trauma, and being stereotyped or labeled. Here are some of the responses we receive when asked people for an example of shame. Here are some examples. Shame is getting laid off and having to tell my pregnant wife. Shame is having someone ask, when are you due? When I'm not pregnant. Shame is hiding the fact that I'm in recovery. Shame is raging at my kids. Shame is bankruptcy. Shame is my boss calling me an idiot in front of the client. Shame is not making partner. Shame is my husband leaving me for my next door neighbor. Shame is my wife asking me for a divorce and telling me that she wants children, but not with me. Shame is my DUI. Shame is infertility. Shame is telling my fiance that my dad lives in France when in fact he's in prison. Shame is internet porn. Shame is flunking out of school twice. Shame is hearing my parents fight through the walls and wondering if I'm the only one who feels this afraid. Shame is real pain. The importance of social acceptance and connection is reinforced by our brain chemistry, and the pain that results from social rejection and disconnection is real pain. In a 2011 study funded by the National Institute of Mental Health and by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, researchers found that, as far as the brain is concerned, physical pain and intense experience of social rejection hurt in the same way. So when I define shame as an intensely painful experience, I'm not kidding. Neuroscience advances confirm that we've known all along emotions can hurt and cause pain. And just as we often struggle to define physical pain, describing emotional pain is difficult. Shame is particularly hard because it hates having words wrapped around it. It hates being spoken. Page 71, untangling shame, guilt, humiliation, and embarrassment. In fact, as we work to understand shame, one of the simpler reasons that shame is so difficult to talk about is vocabulary. We often use the terms embarrassment, guilt, humiliation, and shame interchangeably. It might seem overly picky to stress the importance of using the appropriate term to describe an experience or an emotion. However, it is much more than semantics. How we experience these different emotions come down to self-talk. How do we talk to ourselves about what's happening? The best place to start examining self-talk and untangling these 4 distinct emotions is with shame and guilt. The majority of shame researchers and clinicals agree that the difference between shame and guilt is best understood as the difference between I am bad and I did something bad. Guilt equals, and this is good if you're taking notes, I did something bad. Shame equals I am bad. For example, let's say that you forgot that you made plans to meet a friend at noon for lunch. At 12:15 p.m., your friend calls from the restaurant to make sure you're okay. If your self-talk is, I'm such an idiot, I'm a terrible friend and a total loser, that's shame. If, on the other hand, your self-talk is, I can't believe I did that, what a crappy thing to do, that's guilt. Here's what's interesting, especially for those who automatically think you should feel like a terrible friend, or a little shame will help you keep your act together next time. When we feel shame, we are most likely to protect ourselves by blaming something or someone, rationalizing our lapse, offering an ingenious apology, or hiding out. Rather than apologizing, we blame our friend and rationalize forgetting. I told you I was really busy. This wasn't a good day for me. Or we apologize half-heartedly and think to ourselves, whatever. If she knew how busy I am, she'd be apologizing. Or we see who is calling and don't answer the phone at all. And then we finally can't stop dodging our friend. We lie. Didn't you get my email? I canceled in the morning. You should check your spam folder. When we apologize for something we've done, make amends, or change a behavior that doesn't align with our values, guilt, not shame, is most often the driving force. We feel guilty when we hold up something we've done or failed to do against our values and find they don't match up. It's an uncomfortable feeling, but one that's helpful. The psychological discomfort, something similar to cognitive dissonance, is what motivates meaningful change. Guilt is just as powerful as shame, but its influence is positive, while shame corrodes the very part of us that believes we can change and do better. We live in a world where most people still subscribe to the belief that shame is a good tool for keeping people in line. Not only is this wrong, but it's dangerous. Shame is highly correlated with addiction, violence, aggression, depression, eating disorders, and bullying. Researchers don't find shame correlated with positive outcomes at all. There are no data to support that shame is a helpful compass for good behavior. In fact, shame is much more likely to be the cause of destructive and hurtful behaviors than it is to be the solution. Again, it is human nature to want to feel worthy of love and belonging. When we experience shame, we feel disconnected and desperate for worthiness. When we're hurting, either full of shame or even just feeling the fear of shame, we are more likely to engage in self-destructive behaviors and to attack or shame others. In the chapters on parenting, leadership, and education, we'll explore how shame erodes our courage and fuels disengagement, and what we can do to cultivate cultures of worthiness, vulnerability, and shame resilience. Humiliation is another word that we often confuse with shame. Donald Klein captures the difference between shame and humiliation when he writes, quote, "People believe they deserve their shame. They do not believe they deserve their humiliation. If John is in a meeting with his colleagues and his boss calls him a loser because of his inability to close a sale, John will probably experience that as either shame or humiliation. If John's self-talk is, God, I am a loser, I'm a failure, that's shame. If his self-talk is, man, my boss is so out of control, this is ridiculous, I don't deserve this, that's humiliation. Humiliation feels terrible and makes for a miserable work or home environment. And if it's ongoing, it can certainly become shame if we start to buy into the messaging. It is, however, still better than shame, rather than internalizing the loser comment. John saying to himself, this isn't about me. When we do that, it's less likely that we'll shut down, act out, or fight back. We stay aligned with our values while we're trying to solve the problem. Embarrassment is the least serious of the four emotions. It's normally fleeting and it can eventually be funny. The hallmark of embarrassment is that when we do something embarrassing, we don't feel alone. We know other folks have done the same thing, and like a blush, it will pass rather than define us. Getting familiar with the language is an important start to understanding shame. It is part of the first element of what I call shame resilience. And as we conclude this chapter, or this part 1 of 2 for chapter 3, let's dive into I get it. Shame is bad. So what do we do about it? Page 74. The answer is shame resilience. Note that shame resistance is not possible. As long as we care about connection, the fear of disconnection will always be a powerful force in our lives. And the pain caused by shame will also be real, always. But here's the great news. In all my studies, I found that men and women with high levels of shame resilience have 4 things in common. I call them the elements of shame resilience. Learning to put these elements into action is what I call gremlin ninja warrior training. We'll go through each of the 4 elements, but first I want to explain what I mean by shame resilience. I mean the ability to practice authenticity when we experience shame, to move through the experience without sacrificing our values, and to come out on the other side of the shame experience with more courage, compassion, and connection that we had going into it. Shame resilience is about moving from shame to empathy and the real antidote to shame. If we can share our story with someone who responds with empathy and understanding, shame can't survive. Self-compassion is also critically important. but because shame is a social concept. It happens between people. It also heals best between people. A social wound needs a social balm, and empathy is that balm. Self-compassion is key because when we're able to be gentle with ourselves in the midst of shame, we're more likely to reach out, connect, and experience empathy. To get to empathy, we have to first know what we're dealing with. Here are the 4 elements of shame resilience. The steps don't always happen in this order, but they always ultimately lead us to empathy and healing. Ready for the 4? Number 1, recognizing shame and understanding its triggers. Shame is biology and biography. Can you physically recognize when you're in the grips of shame, feel your way through it, and figure out what messages and expectations triggered it? Number 2, practicing critical awareness. Can you reality check the messages and expectations that are driving your shame? Are they realistic, attainable? Are they what you want to be or what you think others need/want from you? 3, reaching out. Are you owning and sharing your story? We can't experience empathy if we're not connecting. Number 4, speaking shame. Are you talking about how you feel and asking for what you need when you feel shame? And those 4 elements of shame resilience is where we're going to conclude this part 1 of 2 for chapter 3. I'm going to reiterate 1 through 4, and then we're going to conclude this read with me session. All right. Number 1 is recognizing shame and understanding its triggers. 2, practicing critical awareness. 3, reaching out. And 4, speaking shame. All right, ladies and gentlemen, billionairettes. That concludes part 1 of 2. And we will continue in the next Read With Me session. So see you soon. And make sure to go ahead and share your thoughts. What are your thoughts of shame of this particular Read With Me session? Would love to hear your thoughts. Appreciate you. Love you. I'm so excited that you're here. And remember, we're on a mission to impact the lives of billions of souls all over the world to achieve personal freedom and financial freedom in their lives. And we are doing that right now by developing our minds, our bodies, our souls, our spirits on a daily basis. And we need you to make this mission take place, this vision into a reality. Okay? You impact your world. And so your example, your growth is a ripple effect into other people's lives so that they too can become free in their lives. All right. Hope you have an incredible rest of your day. We'll see you, love you, and talk to you soon.